Imagine a soft line of dawn light spreading across a wide plain where the grass bends gently beneath a cool breeze, and early people move slowly through the quiet morning. They walk with steady steps, their feet pressing into the damp earth, leaving faint tracks that fade under the brushing weight of the wind. The sun rises without hurry, warming the land little by little, and the people begin the calm work of gathering the foods they know the land will offer. They move through tall grasses that sway like a slow tide, searching for seeds, berries, and tender shoots that appear at this time of year. Their pace is unhurried because every movement is familiar, guided by the knowledge passed from one generation to the next, knowledge learned by watching the seasons change and learning the patterns of the land. They bend near small bushes where dark berries hang in clusters. The berries are small, yet they offer sweetness and strength. The gatherers pick them gently so the fragile skin does not break, and they place them carefully into woven baskets that rest against their sides. The baskets are made from reeds gathered near riverbanks, reeds dried in the sun and shaped by practiced hands. As the baskets grow heavier, the people continue moving, stepping around patches of tall reeds, listening to the faint rustle of birds hidden among the stems. A light mist lifts from the ground, rising like a thin veil that softens every shape in the distance. The land feels wide and open, yet full of small gifts that must be found with care. As the morning deepens, more people join the gathering work. Some follow narrow paths near streams where the earth stays moist and bright green plants grow. They look for roots that can be pulled from the loose soil. Their hands work slowly, tracing the stems to find the right point to dig. They use simple tools made from bone and wood, shaped over many days of patient crafting. These tools help them loosen the ground so the roots come out whole. When they lift the roots into the light, soil falls away in soft clumps, and the pale surface of the plant catches the glow of the sun. These roots are washed in the cool water of the stream before being placed into the baskets. Farther away, others move across a patch of open ground where wild grains sway in long golden strands. These grains are still young, and the gatherers brush their hands across the heads to release small seeds that fall into broad baskets. They do not take everything, leaving enough for the wind to scatter and for the earth to renew. They gather only what is needed, following the rhythm set long before them, a rhythm shaped by countless seasons. As the day settles into its quiet rhythm, the people walk to a shaded area near a stand of tall trees. The trees offer nuts with hard shells that fall to the ground when the wind shakes the branches. Some nuts lie hidden beneath layers of leaves, and children help gather them, lifting leaves and searching carefully. Their movements are slow and deliberate, matching the calm work of the adults around them. The nuts are placed into separate baskets, each basket filled with its own kind of food, because different foods must be processed in different ways. The early civilizations understood this well, and they organized their gathered foods with simple but careful methods. Nearby, the sound of a gentle river can be heard. The river has flowed through this valley for longer than anyone can remember, and its water brings life to everything around it. Along its banks, plants with broad leaves grow in clusters. Some of these plants have edible stems, while others offer leaves that can be dried and used later. A small group of gatherers move through these clusters, their hands brushing lightly across the leaves to check which ones are ready to take. They harvest slowly, making sure not to disturb the delicate roots so the plants will continue to grow through the season. As the sun climbs higher, the light becomes warm, but the breeze continues to move gently over the land. The people pause sometimes, not in haste, but to listen to the sounds around them. These sounds tell them much about the day. Birds call from high branches, insects hum near tall grasses, and the river continues its steady flow. All these sounds help the gatherers understand the health of the land. They know when certain plants will ripen based on how the birds behave, and they know when the soil is changing by watching how the insects move. This knowledge is not written, but carried in stories spoken at the end of each day. Stories that help the next generation know where to search and when to be patient. When the baskets grow full, the people begin walking back toward their settlement. It is a simple place, made from materials gathered from the land itself. The homes are shaped from branches, earth and grasses, arranged in a circle around a shared space where food is prepared and preserved. Smoke from a slow, burning fire rises gently into the air, carrying the faint scent of dried herbs. The fire has been kept alive for many days, tended carefully so it remains steady. Around it, others work on preparing foods gathered earlier in the season. The gatherers arrive and place their baskets on the ground. They empty the contents carefully, sorting the foods by type. Some berries are spread on flat stones to dry under the sun. Roots are peeled and sliced so they can be cooked or dried for later. Nuts are cracked open with smooth stones, revealing the rich food inside. The seeds gathered from the wild grains are shaken through woven trays so dust and small debris fall away. Each step is slow and familiar, performed with practiced calm. Throughout the day, the work continues at this peaceful pace. The sun travels across the sky, casting shadows that shift slowly along the ground. When the shadows grow long, the land cools again, and the people take a moment to sit near the fire. They share warm food made from what they gathered, mixing grains with berries, roots with leaves, nuts with herbs. The food is simple, but it strengthens them and connects them to the land around them. As evening arrives, the light becomes softer. The sky turns a gentle shade of gold, then fades into tones of deep blue. The river reflects this change, turning from bright silver to a muted glow. The gathering baskets are cleaned and set aside for the next day. Tools are placed in a safe place where they will stay dry overnight. Children settle near their families, and the elders begin speaking in low voices, telling stories of past seasons, of journeys taken to find new plants, and of the long relationship between people and the land. The stories blend into the quiet night air. They describe times when the rains were plentiful and the plants grew thick and tall. They describe times when droughts came and people traveled far to find water and food. Each story carries a lesson, and each lesson is shaped by the careful observation of nature. The early civilizations depended entirely on the patterns of the world around them. They watched the stars to understand the passing of months. They watched the migration of animals to know when certain fruits would ripen. They felt the soil, smelled the air, and listened to the wind. As the stars appear overhead, the settlement grows quiet. The fire burns low, sending a soft glow across the ground. The people rest after a full day of calm, steady work. Tomorrow they will rise again with the early light, following the same gentle rhythm. They will walk once more into the fields, forests and riverbanks, trusting the land to provide and trusting their knowledge to guide them. The cycle continues without haste, shaped by the slow turning of the seasons and the deep connection between people and the wild foods that sustain them. What follows is an extended continuation of this calm historical story, moving through early civilizations across different landscapes and seasons, keeping the same slow, restful tone. The movement will be gradual and steady, linking one setting to another, always focusing on simple routines, natural patterns, and the peaceful work of gathering food from the land. I will continue the narration seamlessly, keeping the pace gentle and the language soothing. Imagine the soft light of another morning settling over a different landscape, where early people live near the edge of a great river that winds across miles of fertile plains. The river has shaped the lives of these people for countless generations. It floods in certain seasons, leaving behind rich soil where plants grow in abundance. The people here understand these cycles well, and they rise before the sun to begin their long, calm walk along the banks. They carry shallow baskets woven from reeds. The reeds themselves were gathered many months before, dried in the sun, and split into long, flexible strips. These baskets are light but strong, perfect for carrying the tender plants that grow near the water's edge. The gatherers move slowly along the bank, stepping around smooth stones and driftwood. The river makes a quiet sound as it flows, a gentle lapse of water over water that continues without interruption. The plants here grow thick and green. Some have long stems that can be sliced and cooked. Others grow close to the ground, their leaves soft and cool against the fingers. The people know how each plant tastes, how each one should be prepared, and how much to take so that nothing is wasted. They bend, pick a few leaves, place them gently into their baskets, and stand again, breathing the fresh morning air. Birds call out from the tall grasses farther inland. These grasses grow in great fields, swaying together when the wind moves across them. Some gatherers walk toward the grasses to look for wild seeds. They move their hands over the tops of the stalks, catching loose seeds in their baskets. The seeds are tiny, but collected over time, they offer much needed nourishment. The people gather them patiently, never rushing, simply accepting the rhythm of the day. Others walk farther from the river, toward stands of trees that drop small fruits during this season. The fruits fall quietly, landing in the grass where they wait to be found. The gatherers pick them one by one, brushing off bits of dirt and checking the softness of the skin. The fruits that are too ripe will be eaten quickly before they spoil. The firmer ones will be stored for later, packed into clay containers that keep them cool and safe. By midday, the sun shines strongly, but the people find shade beneath the trees. They sit on the ground, sharing small pieces of fruit while resting from their work. The air is warm, but the breeze from the river cools their skin. The world around them moves at its slow, natural pace, unchanged by hurry or haste. After resting, they continue their gathering, spreading out into small groups. As the day begins to settle into evening, they return to their settlement. It is built slightly above the floodplain, safe from the rising waters of the rainy season. Homes made from mud and straw stand in neat rows, each one shaped by careful hands. Smoke rises once again from small fires, carrying the smell of cooking leaves and roots. The people empty their baskets and begin preparing the day's harvest. Leaves are washed and hung to dry. Fruits are sliced into thin pieces and placed on flat surfaces where the fading sunlight can still reach them. Seeds are sifted through woven trays, separating them from bits of chaff. Night comes softly once more. Stars appear above the vast plains, reflected faintly in the slow-moving river. The people sit together, listening to the night sounds. Frogs croak near the water, crickets hum in the grasses. The air cools steadily. When the fires burn low, families retreat into their homes to rest. The cycle will continue at dawn, just as it always has. Imagine the same calm rhythm unfolding in another early civilization, this one built among gentle hills where forests cover much of the land. The trees here grow tall and thick, with broad canopies that filter the sunlight into scattered patches across the forest floor. The air is cooler beneath the branches, and the people who live here have adapted their gathering methods to the forests around them. They rise early, stepping out of small homes built from wooden beams and thatched roofs. They carry woven bags made from plant fibers gathered from the forest itself. These bags are soft and flexible, perfect for collecting nuts, mushrooms, and forest greens. The gatherers walk slowly along narrow paths that wind between tall trunks. The forest is full of life, and each day offers something new to find. The people search the ground near oak and chestnut trees for fallen nuts. They move leaves aside gently, checking for shells that have dropped overnight. The nuts are gathered in silence, the forest around them filled with the faint hum of insects and the distant calls of birds. They gather enough to fill their bags, but leave many behind so the forest animals can eat and the trees can continue their cycles. Farther into the forest, small patches of wild greens grow in places where sunlight filters more strongly through the canopy. The greens grow tender and bright, their leaves damp with morning dew. The gatherers pick only the outer leaves, allowing the plants to continue growing. They move calmly from patch to patch, following a path of knowledge learned over many generations. At the base of large, fallen logs, mushrooms grow in long rows. The people know which mushrooms are safe to eat and which ones must be left untouched. They pick the safe varieties with gentle hands, placing them into the soft bags so they do not bruise. The forest floor feels soft beneath their feet, covered in soil built up from countless seasons of fallen leaves. At midday, shafts of sunlight pierce through the leaves above, creating warm patches where the gatherers sit and rest. They share small bites of dried fruit and drink water carried from the nearby stream. The forest remains quiet, as if resting with them. After a short break, they stand again and continue the calm search for food. The day moves on, and the gatherers return to their hillside settlement. The homes blend naturally with the land around them, built from materials taken only in small amounts, so the forest remains abundant. The people prepare the day's gathering as the sun lowers behind the hills. Nuts are cracked open and stored. Greens are washed and sorted. Mushrooms are sliced and laid out to dry. A calm fire burns at the center of the settlement, providing warmth and a place to cook simple meals. As night settles, the forest becomes alive with new sounds. Owls call from high branches. Small creatures move through the underbrush, their footsteps barely audible. The people sit near the fire, listening to elders speak about the patterns of the forest, the stories of past seasons, and the wisdom that helps them live in harmony with the land. The air is cool, and the first sounds of the day are steady and soft. People rise slowly, stretch their hands, and step into the open space between their homes. The ground carries a thin layer of night moisture, and each footstep leaves a faint mark that fades as the sun warms the soil. The people begin their day with calm motions, knowing that their daily life depends on gathering the plants and foods around them. They follow the same slow routine every day, and this routine gives them comfort and order. They pick up simple baskets, the same baskets they used yesterday and the day before. The baskets are light and smooth because they have been handled for many seasons. The people walk toward the fields and riverbeds where food grows in the wild. Each step follows a path used for many years. The paths wind through open areas and then narrow as they near thick grass. The grass moves gently under the morning wind. The people breathe slowly as they walk, ready to gather what the land offers today. At the riverbank, the land is moist and dark. Plants with soft leaves grow in long rows. These leaves can be eaten raw when young or cooked when older. People squat near the plants and check them with their hands. They feel the stem and leaf surface to know if the plant is ready. They take only the leaves they need and leave the rest to grow. Their motions are steady and without rush. The river makes a quiet sound beside them, a repetitive sound that does not change. Birds move through the reeds. Their wings make a small shaking noise. All these sounds are part of the people's daily life. Others walk farther away from the water to areas where the soil is drier there. Wild roots grow. These roots hold important food, especially in colder months. To gather them, people press small digging sticks into the ground. They push the soil aside slowly, so the roots come out whole. Each root is lifted, cleaned with the hand, and placed into a basket. The people know which roots taste good when cooked, and which ones must be boiled many times. Their knowledge grows from daily work, and they share it with the younger ones who watch and copy the motions. As the sun rises higher, the air becomes warm, but not too hot. People turn toward areas where shrubs grow. These shrubs hold berries that ripen at different times. The people know by the color and feel which berries are ready. They pick them one by one so the skin does not break. They place them gently at the bottom of the basket and avoid shaking the branches too hard. Too much movement can damage the next round of berries that are not yet ripe. This calm approach keeps the shrubs healthy for many seasons. People learned this long ago by watching what happens when plants are pulled too quickly. Farther away, Tall grain plants grow in patches. These grains are not planted by humans yet, but grow each year with the wind and rain. The people walk slowly through them. They run their hands across the grain heads to loosen the seeds. The seeds fall into wide baskets. This work takes many hours, but the rhythm is steady and simple. People gather a little each day, and by the end of the season, they have enough to store for months. Storage is important, so people take great care not to spill or waste the seeds. They know how much work it takes to gather them. By midday the light becomes bright, and shadows under the trees grow sharp. People walk into these shaded areas to rest. They sit on stones or on the ground. They drink water from small clay vessels they carried from home. The water is cool because it was collected at dawn. They share small pieces of yesterday's dried fruits. They do not talk loudly. Their voices stay low and calm. After resting, they rise again and continue gathering. Their day is shaped by sunlight, and they use every hour before the heat becomes too strong. As the afternoon passes, people begin walking home. Their baskets carry leaves, roots, berries, grains, and nuts. Each type of food fits into its own container, so it can be prepared in a proper way. The homes sit close together on slightly raised ground. The raised ground keeps them safe from water when strong rains arrive. Smoke rises from the central fire. The fire is kept burning day and night because it takes time and effort to start a new one. People place their baskets near the fire and begin sorting the plants. Leaves are washed with water. The youngest leaves are eaten raw today. The older leaves are boiled and then dried so they can last longer. Roots are scraped with simple stones to remove the skin. Some will be cooked right away. Others will be sliced and dried for storage. Berries are spread on flat surfaces of woven reed. They dry slowly under the soft sun and can be stored in clay jars. Grains are shaken through shallow trays. Light pieces of chaff blow away in the wind. Heavy seeds remain. People do not rush. They follow the same steps every day. This routine is part of their life and helps them stay safe. Food must be stored because seasons change. When cold months come, plants will not grow, and the people depend on the foods they gathered earlier. Because of this, they work steadily and calmly every day. As the sun lowers, the land fills with long shadows. People wash their hands and sit near the fire. They eat a simple meal made from plants gathered earlier in the week. The meal has roots that were cooked, grains that were warmed, and dried leaves that were softened in hot water. The taste is familiar and comforting. People do not need strong flavors. They value steady food that fills the body and brings energy for the next day. Children sit near elders and listen to quiet explanations about which plants grow in which seasons. Elders describe how to look at a plant and know if it is ready. They speak slowly, without dramatic words, only clear instructions based on long experience. They talk about rain patterns, wind changes, and signs in the soil. These signs help people know when the land is ready to offer new food. This teaching keeps the group strong. Every person learns how to gather food and how to stay safe in the environment. When night arrives, the land cools. People lie down on simple bedding made from grass and soft fibers. The fire burns low in the center of the settlement. The crackling is slow and steady. People fall asleep knowing that tomorrow will follow the same calm pattern. They will wake at dawn, gather their baskets, walk toward the fields and river, and repeat their daily work. Imagine the same daily rhythm taking place in another early group far away, near a coastline where the land meets the sea. These people gather wild foods that grow in sandy soil and rocky areas. They wake before the sun rises and the air smells of salt. The steady sound of water touching the shore continues all day and night. This sound helps people understand the movement of the tide. Tides matter because some plants can only be reached when the water level is low. People walk across the beach carrying wide, flat baskets. These baskets are made for sea plants and shells. When the tide pulls away from the shore, patches of edible seaweed become visible. People bend down and pick the seaweed slowly so the stems remain attached to the rocks. Taking only the top part allows the plant to grow again. They place the seaweed into their baskets. The seaweed holds water, so the baskets become heavy quickly. People do not gather too much at once. They return to their homes, lay the seaweed on flat stones, and let the sun dry it. Dried seaweed lasts long and provides salt and minerals needed by the body. Farther inland, small bushes grow in sandy soil. These bushes produce small fruits that survive in dry air. People pick these fruits during certain months. The fruits are not sweet, but they offer important nutrition. People place them in smaller baskets and keep them dry. In this region, moisture can spoil fruits quickly, so people pay close attention to storage. Clay pots are lined with dry leaves before fruits are placed inside, which keeps them safe from insects. People in coastal areas also gather roots that grow under loose sand. They use simple digging sticks and their hands. They search for signs like small cracks in the sand or certain patterns of growth on the surface, which help them know where roots lie hidden. When they lift the roots, they brush off the sand and place them into baskets. These roots cook well over slow fire and are eaten with dried seaweed or crushed nuts. Every day they follow the same pattern. They move with the tide, rest when the sun is strong, store food before night. Their life depends on steady work and simple routines. They do not rush, because rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes can cause food loss. Calm work keeps their group strong. Night at the coast is cooler. People sit near small fires and listen to the water. They eat cooked roots and dried sea plants. They speak in quiet tones about wind changes and about how certain clouds signal strong weather. These signals help them know when the sea may rise higher than usual. Knowing this helps them keep food stores safe. This life continues through many seasons. Children learn how to watch the tide and how to pick seaweed without harming its base. They learn which fruits stay good for long periods and which must be eaten quickly. They learn how to dry roots and leaves. All this knowledge keeps their group safe. They learn the meaning of every patch of earth through touch, sight, and memory, and this quiet knowledge shaped their survival in a steady and dependable way. The soil guided their footsteps as much as the sky or the winds, and its textures became part of their daily rhythm. As the warm season settled more fully over the land, the people also moved toward the riverbanks, where the ground held more moisture. This soil stayed cool even at midday, and plants there grew with broad green stems that were firm but easy to harvest. The people knew these areas well because they returned to them year after year, always finding the same types of plants, always sensing changes in the pattern of growth. They knelt near the shallow water, reached into the dense vegetation, and gathered edible shoots. Their movements were slow, both out of caution and out of habit. They did not need to hurry. The land allowed them to collect enough with steady, patient work. Children followed behind the adults, learning by watching. They stepped carefully so they would not disturb the softer soil near the water, because footsteps in the wrong place could loosen the earth too much, allowing roots to wash away when the next rain came. Older members of the group would speak softly as they pointed out areas where the soil formed a thin crust on top. This meant the sun had dried the surface but had not warmed the deeper layers, which held the roots in place. Such information passed through the group without ceremony, spoken in short, simple phrases during the daily work. Farther from the river, the soil changed again. It became lighter, with a sandy texture. These areas supported plants that grew low to the ground, with small leaves that could withstand long days of heat. The people gathered from these spaces as well, often collecting seeds that they carried in baskets. The seeds were small and required careful handling, so the people would sit together on the ground, passing baskets from one person to another, sorting through the contents with patient hands. They did not speak much during this task. The work required quiet attention, and their calm movements kept the seeds from scattering. Evenings brought a shift in the land's surface. When the sun slipped low, the earth cooled. and people walked out again to check areas where they had gathered earlier in the day. Cooler temperatures sometimes revealed cracks in the soil that had not been visible before. These cracks indicated where moisture had dried too quickly, which could change where edible roots would grow in the coming days. People took note of these patterns without writing them down. They simply remembered, linking each new change to past seasons. This memory created a steady cycle of actions that guided when and where the group searched for food. Days stretched into weeks, and the growing season continued. People sometimes moved to higher ground, where the soil held fewer nutrients but captured breezes that cooled the body during long walks. Here, they found shrubs that produced small berries late in the day. These berries were difficult to collect when the sun was strong, so people waited until the light softened before reaching into the branches. They used both hands to gather the fruit gently, keeping the delicate skins from breaking. The berries did not last long after being picked, so they were eaten within the same day, often shared around the fire in the evening. As the land shifted from warm days to slightly cooler nights, families also visited areas near stands of tall grasses. The soil here was different again, holding moisture deeper below the surface. It supported plants with long fibrous roots that could be pulled free with patient effort. The people would grip the stems, twist slowly, and lift the roots out in one piece. This careful method prevented the soil from collapsing and preserved the growing area for future gatherings. When the roots came free, they were brushed clean with hands or small wooden tools, then placed in bundles. Many such tasks repeated day after day, giving the people a sense of order. They did not treat gathering as a hurried task, but as a calm and steady part of life. They followed familiar paths that curved around hills and along riverbanks, always paying attention to the signs beneath their feet. Each sound of shifting earth told them something. Each patch of growth revealed a small detail about how the land was changing. They learned which areas stayed fertile after storms, which slopes dried quickly in the sun, and which patches of shade supported moisture-loving plants. As time passed, the group also watched how the soil responded to animals that shared the land. When herds passed through an area, the ground became packed and firm, making it harder for new shoots to push through. The people noticed these changes and adjusted their routines, moving to areas where the animals had not recently traveled. This balance between human activity and the movements of animals formed a natural pattern that shaped the growing and gathering cycles of early life. When storms arrived, the people waited until the rain softened the soil. After heavy rainfall, the earth released certain roots more easily, allowing the group to gather food with less effort. But too much rain could wash away the top layers of soil, revealing stones and leaving the ground unstable. People knew to avoid these areas until the soil settled again. They understood these slow rhythms, and each new season reinforced what earlier generations had learned. On days when the sky stayed overcast, people moved more freely, knowing the sun would not harden the earth too quickly. These were good days for gathering from open fields. The soil stayed cool and moist, making it easier to pull up plants without disturbing too much ground at once. People carried simple baskets made from plant fibers, using them repeatedly across seasons. These baskets became smooth with use, shaped by the weight of seeds, roots, and leaves. As the long cycle of the year continued, the steady relationship between people and the soil remained at the center of their daily life. Every task connected to the land's quiet signals. The softness or hardness of the ground guided when they moved, when they rested, and when they gathered. The soil carried the memory of rain, sun, wind, and footsteps, and the people responded to this memory with patience. From morning to night, the connection continued. The story of their days was shaped not by speed or urgency, but by calm attention to the earth beneath them. And with each season that passed, their understanding deepened, allowing them to gather wild foods with confidence, clarity, and steady routines that supported their entire community. The grasses held moisture longer, and dew settled in thin layers over the broad leaves of plants that had grown tall during the warm months. This change in the daily rhythm of temperature guided the people toward different gathering areas. Because certain plants ripened better under cooler light while others began to fade, they moved quietly at dawn, stepping gently across the damp ground, knowing that this time of day gave them the clearest view of the conditions around each plant. The people walked along familiar paths, some of which had been used for generations. These paths were not shaped by tools or deliberate building, but simply by repeated footsteps. They curved around large stones, followed small rises in the earth, and traced gentle lines along the edges of fields. As the people followed these routes, they checked the growth of plants that stored energy in their roots during cooler nights. They could tell when a root had reached its full size, because the stems above it showed small changes in color and stiffness. They bent down, pressed lightly on the soil, and understood what lay beneath without digging deeply. In these early civilizations, gathering remained one of the most reliable ways to keep the community fed. People learned to read the signs that told them which areas would continue to provide food and which ones needed rest. When a patch of ground showed signs of strain, such as thin cracks or pale leaves, they moved on to a different location, allowing the land time to recover. They did not describe this process in complex terms. It simply became part of the daily routine, a quiet understanding passed from older members of the group to younger ones during calm conversations near fires in the evening. As the days grew shorter, people shifted their attention to the kinds of foods that stored well for longer periods. They gathered nuts from areas where the soil had supported trees with deep roots. These trees grew slowly, and the people approached them with steady movements. They collected nuts from the ground, checking each one by touch, separating those that felt solid from those that had cracks or lightness that suggested emptiness inside. The people placed the good ones into woven bags made from tough plant fibers. These bags could hold heavy loads without breaking, and they were passed from person to person as they moved through the trees. Near the edges of forests, people gathered mushrooms that grew where fallen leaves had begun to break down into soft layers. They moved carefully through these spaces, stepping around logs and touching the soft ground with their hands. The mushrooms grew in clusters, and the people collected them only when they recognized the shapes and textures and had been safely used by generations before them. They did not take all of them from any one area. They left some behind to ensure future growth, because they had learned that careful gathering created a steady supply year after year. During these times, the people also paid attention to the behavior of birds and insects, which often signaled changes in the availability of wild foods. When birds gathered in large numbers near certain shrubs, it meant that berries were ripening. The people would approach these shrubs later in the day, after the birds had moved on, and gather what remained. They moved slowly so they would not damage the branches. Each berry was picked with gentle fingers, placed into small containers made from hollowed plant stems or shaped clay. These containers kept the berries from being crushed. During the walk back to the settlement, as the cool season settled further, winds grew steady, moving across open plains and carrying dried plant scents through the air. The people understood that these winds signaled the time when seeds from tall grasses loosened naturally and became easier to gather. They carried wide baskets through the fields and brushed their hands lightly across the tops of the grasses. The seeds fell into the baskets without force, guided by the movement of the wind and the simple motion of the gatherer's hands. The people collected these seeds in large amounts because the seeds were small but valuable. They could be stored for long periods and used during colder days when fresh plants were harder to find. Even as temperatures dropped, the people did not stop their daily movement across the land. They adjusted their clothing. wrapping themselves in simple coverings made from plant fibers or softened hides, and continued to observe the patterns of growth. Some roots grew best during cooler weather, pushing their energy downward as the surface plants wilted. The people knew this well. They would return to areas that had seemed quiet during the warm season, now finding strong roots beneath the soil. They dug these roots with simple wooden tools, using slow, steady motions that protected both the plants and the soil. When a root came free, they cleaned it and placed it in bundles tied with strips of bark. During these calm days, people often walked long distances, moving from one familiar gather area to another. They carried only what they needed: baskets, tools, and simple water containers made from dried gourds. With each step, they paid attention to the ground. The firmness of the soil told them how deep the frost had formed overnight, and the color of the surface revealed how much moisture remained from past rains. They used this information without naming it. It was simply understood through repeated experience. At night, near the quiet fires, older members of the group described the patterns of past years. They shared simple stories of how the land changed after long periods of cold or dry weather, and how certain plants returned only when the soil had been undisturbed for many seasons. These stories provided guidance for younger gatherers, helping them understand where to look for food and when to move on to different areas. The words were gentle, steady, and factual, describing the land as it was and as it had been. As the cold season deepened, the community depended even more on stored foods. But gathering continued in smaller ways. People searched for evergreen plants that retained their strength even during the coldest days. These plants grew in sheltered spaces, often near rocks that absorbed the warmth of the sun during daylight. The people collected the leaves and stems of these plants to add flavor to their meals. Even in the cold, the land offered something, and the people learned to accept each small gift with calm patience. When the winds turned harsh and strong, the people stayed close to the sheltered areas of their settlement. But they continued to watch the land. They noticed how snow settled unevenly across the fields, revealing areas where the ground rose or dipped. These patterns told them where water would collect when the snow melted, which in turn revealed where new plants would sprout in the coming season. In this way, even during a time when gathering was minimal, the people continued to learn from the land. As the cold season slowly released its hold, the people welcomed the first signs of thawing soil. The top layer softened, and water pooled in small depressions. People walked carefully through these areas, testing the soil with their feet. They felt the changes in texture, knowing that this early thaw allowed certain plants to send out their first shoots. These shoots were tender and easily damaged, so the people gathered them with careful hands, protecting the roots for future growth. The shoots were eaten fresh, shared within the community as a sign that a new cycle had begun. With each passing day, the land awakened more fully. The people moved across the fields, checking areas where seeds had fallen during the previous months. New plants appeared, some familiar and some requiring closer observation. The people bent low, studied the shapes of leaves, and compared them to the signs they remembered from past seasons. When they recognized a useful plant, they made a mental note of its location, returning at the right time to gather it. If they were unsure, they waited, allowing the plant to grow further until its identity became clear. As the warm season approached once again, the land filled with renewal. The people walked through the familiar rhythms with calm confidence, knowing that each season brought its own challenges and its own rewards. They moved through forests, along rivers, across plains, and near the edges of hills, gathering the foods that nature provided. Their lives continued in a steady pattern shaped by observation, memory, and patience, and the land responded to their gentle presence, offering the nourishment that sustained them through each cycle of change. As the seasons moved forward and the patterns of the land shifted once more, the people slowly returned to practices that supported them not only through gathering but also through the steady, necessary act of hunting small and medium animals. This activity remained closely connected to the same calm rhythm of life, because early communities relied on many sources of food, and hunting formed a natural part of that wider cycle. They did not separate it sharply from gathering. Instead, they treated it as another way the land provided nourishment, another quiet task shaped by careful attention, patience, and the slow observation of daily signs. The people learned early that animals followed predictable paths, formed by the search for water, shade, and plants. In the same way they studied the soil, they studied the ground for tracks. These tracks were simple impressions left in soft earth, pressed into mud near riverbanks, or shaped into dust near open plains. The people walked slowly along these paths, understanding which tracks were fresh and which had been made days before. If the edges of a footprint were sharp, they knew the animal had passed recently. If the impressions were faded or partially filled with wind-blown soil, they understood that too much time had passed to follow them. Their hunting did not involve long chases. It involved slow walking, quiet observation, and steady breathing. They listened to the rustling of grass, the snapping of twigs, and the distant calls of birds. These sounds guided them as they moved through areas where animals fed on plants the people also gathered. In this way, the two activities remained linked. Where edible roots grew, small animals often dug into the soil. Where shrubs produced berries, birds and mammals visited frequently. The people used this knowledge without pressure or haste, allowing the land to show them where to go. In early civilizations, hunting tools were simple. People carried short wooden spears, smooth stones, or light throwing sticks. These tools were shaped through repeated practice, not abrupt invention. A spear was sharpened with patient scraping. A stone was chosen for its weight and balance. A throwing stick was curved gently to match the motion of the hand. These tools allowed people to bring down smaller animals like birds, rabbits, and rodents, which formed a steady part of their diet. They hunted larger animals less often, because such hunts required more risk and cooperation. Hunting small animals took place near the edges of fields where plants grew low and dense. The people walked along these areas late in the afternoon, when animals came out to forage before nightfall. They moved with careful steps, placing their feet where the ground was firm to avoid making noise. If they found burrows, they knelt and examined the openings. If fresh soil lay scattered around the entrance, they knew the animal had been active recently. They waited near these areas with patient stillness, ready to act quickly but calmly. In areas where tall grasses grew, the people used a different method. They formed small circles around a patch of grass, moving slowly inward. By tightening the circle, they gently guided small animals toward a central point where one or two hunters could act. This method did not require shouting or sudden motion. It relied on steady coordination, the same kind used during large gathering activities. The people worked together with simple hand signals and shared understanding, shaped by years of practice. Along rivers, hunting took different forms. People often used the early morning hours, when animals visited the water to drink. They stood among reeds, their bodies still, blending with the slow movement of the plants. When birds landed to feed on insects near the water's surface, the people used smooth stones or simple nets woven from plant fibers to catch them. These nets were light and flexible, carried easily from place to place. People dried them near fires after each use, repairing them with calm care during quiet evenings. Hunting near forest edges required another set of skills. In these areas, animals like deer or small antelope passed through narrow paths between trees. The people waited near these paths, careful not to disturb the leaves underfoot. They watched for the flicker of movement between branches. They listened for footsteps, which sounded different depending on the animal. A heavy step meant a larger creature. A quick, light step meant something smaller. If the hunters decided the animal was too large or the conditions too uncertain, they simply let it pass. Hunting was not driven by urgency. It remained part of the steady rhythm of life, balanced with gathering and shaped by the land's slow cycles. Some days, hunting was secondary. The people focused on gathering plants and paid attention to animals only as part of the surrounding environment. But other days, hunting became more central. During dry periods when plants grew slowly, the people relied more on animal meat to supplement their diets. During these times, they used cooperative hunting, where several members of the group worked together to guide animals toward a valley, a rock outcrop, or a natural barrier. These hunts required calm communication and slow preparation. People walked long distances to position themselves correctly, often before the sun rose high. When an animal was successfully hunted, the people treated the event with quiet respect. They carried the animal back to their settlement using poles made from straight branches. They walked steadily, keeping the load balanced between them. Once home, they prepared the meat with simple methods. They used sharp stones to remove the hide, which they later softened through slow scraping and drying. They saved bones for tools and fat for lamps, making use of every part. Nothing was wasted, because each animal provided not only food, but materials that supported daily life. During the periods when large migrations passed through the region, such as herds moving toward greener areas, the people increased their hunting slightly. They did not attempt to hunt the largest animals in the herd, knowing the risks. Instead, they focused on the younger or smaller ones that strayed near the edges. They approached with care, staying downwind so their scent would not carry. They moved low to the ground, using bushes and tall grass as cover. These hunts required patience, often lasting many hours before action was taken. Children learned about hunting the same way they learned about gathering through watching and slow participation. Older members allowed them to handle small tools, observe tracks, and follow at a distance during minor hunts. They learned how to stay quiet, how to read signs in the land, and how to respect the animals they hunted. These lessons were not given with strict instructions, but through gentle corrections and simple demonstrations. Over time, the children learned to understand the natural rhythm that connected their lives to the movements of animals. At night, hunters and gatherers sat together near the fire, sharing foods collected during the day. They spoke about where animals had been seen, how the land looked, and how the patterns of each season shaped the behaviors of different species. These discussions were simple and practical, helping the community plan the next day's movements. They did not think of themselves as separate from the land or its creatures. Their survival came from understanding and working with the natural cycles around them. As the landscape changed across centuries, hunting techniques adapted. When people began forming more permanent settlements near rivers, they developed ways to use the natural terrain to their advantage. They positioned themselves near narrow passages in the land where animals were likely to travel. They created simple barriers from fallen branches, guiding animals into areas where hunters waited. These methods remained straightforward, shaped by observation rather than complex design. When civilizations grew slowly and small villages formed, hunting became more specialized. Some members of the community developed a strong understanding of animal behavior and movement. They went out in small groups, often before dawn, following trails that stretched across many kilometers. Others remained near the settlement, caring for stored food and gathering plants. The balance between tasks remained essential. Hunting alone could not sustain them, nor could gathering alone. The steady blend of both created stability. In areas with dense forests, hunting shifted again. People used narrow openings between trees to follow animals quietly. They stepped carefully over roots, knowing that a single loud sound could scatter a group of deer or send smaller animals hiding into the undergrowth. They relied on their sense of hearing as much as their sight. A rustle of leaves or the faint sound of breathing could guide them, toward their target. They carried torches at night when necessary, but preferred daylight when they could clearly see the terrain. Across time, the relationship between people and animals remained central to survival. The people understood that animals follow food sources just as they did. When plants grew well in one area, animals gathered there too. When dry seasons arrived, animals moved toward water, and the people followed their movements. The cycle repeated year after year, forming a natural rhythm that guided both hunting and gathering in calm harmony. Even as early civilizations began shaping simple tools from metal, the tone of hunting did not change drastically. Tools improved slowly, but the main method remained the same: patience, observation, and respect for the natural patterns of the land. Metal points on spears made hunting more efficient, but people continued walking the same paths, listening for the same sounds, and reading the same tracks pressed into the soil. The land itself remained their guide. As the seasons moved forward and the patterns of the land shifted once more, the people slowly returned to practices that supported them not only through gathering but also through the steady, necessary act of hunting small and medium animals. This activity remained closely connected to the same calm rhythm of life, because early communities relied on many sources of food, and hunting formed a natural part of that wider cycle. They did not separate it sharply from gathering. Instead, they treated it as another way the land provided nourishment, another quiet task shaped by careful attention, patience, and the slow observation of daily signs. The people learned early that animals followed predictable paths formed by the search for water, shade, and plants. In the same way they studied the soil, they studied the ground for tracks. These tracks were simple impressions left in soft earth, pressed into mud near riverbanks, or shaped into dust near open plains. The people walked slowly along these paths, understanding which tracks were fresh and which had been made days before. If the edges of a footprint were sharp, they knew the animal had passed recently. If the impressions were faded or partially filled with wind-blown soil, they understood that too much time had passed to follow them. Their hunting did not involve long chases. It involved slow walking, quiet observation, and steady breathing. They listened to the rustling of grass, the snapping of twigs, and the distant calls of birds. These sounds guided them as they moved through areas where animals fed on plants the people also gathered. In this way, the two activities remained linked. Where edible roots grew, small animals often dug into the soil. Where shrubs produced berries, birds and mammals visited frequently. The people used this knowledge without pressure or haste, allowing the land to show them where to go. In early civilizations, hunting tools were simple. People carried short wooden spears, smooth stones, or light throwing sticks. These tools were shaped through repeated practice, not abrupt invention. A spear was sharpened with patient scraping. A stone was chosen for its weight and balance. A throwing stick was curved gently to match the motion of the hand. These tools allowed people to bring down smaller animals like birds, rabbits, and rodents, which formed a steady part of their diet. They hunted larger animals less often, because such hunts required more risk and cooperation. Hunting small animals took place near the edges of fields where plants grew low and dense. The people walked along these areas late in the afternoon, when animals came out to forage before nightfall. They moved with careful steps, placing their feet where the ground was firm to avoid making noise. If they found burrows, they knelt and examined the openings. If fresh soil lay scattered around the entrance, they knew the animal had been active recently. They waited near these areas with patient stillness, ready to act quickly but calmly. In areas where tall grasses grew, the people used a different method. They formed small circles around a patch of grass, moving slowly inward. By tightening the circle, they gently guided small animals toward a central point where one or two hunters could act. This method did not require shouting or sudden motion. It relied on steady coordination, the same kind used during large gathering activities. The people worked together with simple hand signals and shared understanding, shaped by years of practice. Along rivers, hunting took different forms. People often used the early morning hours, when animals visited the water to drink. They stood among reeds, their bodies still, blending with the slow movement of the plants. When birds landed to feed on insects near the water's surface, the people used smooth stones or simple nets woven from plant fibers to catch them. These nets were light and flexible, carried easily from place to place. People dried them near fires after each use, repairing them with calm care during quiet evenings. Hunting near forest edges required another set of skills. In these areas, animals like deer or small antelope passed through narrow paths between trees. The people waited near these paths, careful not to disturb the leaves underfoot. They watched for the flicker of movement between branches. They listened for footsteps, which sounded different depending on the animal. A heavy step meant a larger creature. A quick, light step meant something smaller. If the hunters decided the animal was too large or the conditions too uncertain, they simply let it pass. Hunting was not driven by urgency. It remained part of the steady rhythm of life, balanced with gathering and shaped by the land's slow cycles. Some days, hunting was secondary. The people focused on gathering plants and paid attention to animals only as part of the surrounding environment. But other days, hunting became more central. During dry periods when plants grew slowly, the people relied more on animal meat to supplement their diets. During these times, they used cooperative hunting, where several members of the group worked together to guide animals toward a valley, a rock outcrop, or a natural barrier. These hunts required calm communication and slow preparation. People walked long distances to position themselves correctly, often before the sun rose high. When an animal was successfully hunted, the people treated the event with quiet respect. They carried the animal back to their settlement using poles made from straight branches. They walked steadily, keeping the load balanced between them. Once home, they prepared the meat with simple methods. They used sharp stones to remove the hide, which they later softened through slow scraping and drying. They saved bones for tools and fat for lamps, making use of every part. Nothing was wasted, because each animal provided not only food, but materials that supported daily life. During the periods when large migrations passed through the region, such as herds moving toward greener areas, the people increased their hunting slightly. They did not attempt to hunt the largest animals in the herd, knowing the risks. Instead, they focused on the younger or smaller ones that strayed near the edges. They approached with care, staying downwind so their scent would not carry. They moved low to the ground, using bushes and tall grass as cover. These hunts required patience, often lasting many hours before action was taken. Children learned about hunting the same way they learned about gathering through watching and slow participation. Older members allowed them to handle small tools, observe tracks, and follow at a distance during minor hunts. They learned how to stay quiet, how to read signs in the land, and how to respect the animals they hunted. These lessons were not given with strict instructions, but through gentle corrections and simple demonstrations. Over time, the children learned to understand the natural rhythm that connected their lives to the movements of animals. At night, hunters and gatherers sat together near the fire, sharing foods collected during the day. They spoke about where animals had been seen, how the land looked, and how the patterns of each season shaped the behaviors of different species. These discussions were simple and practical, helping the community plan the next day's movements. They did not think of themselves as separate from the land or its creatures. Their survival came from understanding and working with the natural cycles around them. As the landscape changed across centuries, hunting techniques adapted. When people began forming more permanent settlements near rivers, they developed ways to use the natural terrain to their advantage. They positioned themselves near narrow passages in the land where animals were likely to travel. They created simple barriers from fallen branches, guiding animals into areas where hunters waited. These methods remained straightforward, shaped by observation rather than complex design. When civilizations grew slowly and small villages formed, hunting became more specialized. Some members of the community developed a strong understanding of animal behavior and movement. They went out in small groups, often before dawn, following trails that stretched across many kilometers. Others remained near the settlement, caring for stored food and gathering plants. The balance between tasks remained essential. Hunting alone could not sustain them, nor could gathering alone. The steady blend of both created stability. In areas with dense forests, hunting shifted again. People used narrow openings between trees to follow animals quietly. They stepped carefully over roots, knowing that a single loud sound could scatter a group of deer or send smaller animals hiding into the undergrowth. They relied on their sense of hearing as much as their sight. A rustle of leaves or the faint sound of breathing could guide them toward their target. They carried torches at night when necessary, but preferred daylight when they could clearly see the terrain. Across time, the relationship between people and animals remained central to survival. The people understood that animals follow food sources just as they did. When plants grew well in one area, animals gathered there too. When dry seasons arrived, animals moved toward water, and the people followed their movements. The cycle repeated year after year, forming a natural rhythm that guided both hunting and gathering in calm harmony. Even as early civilizations began shaping simple tools from metal, the tone of hunting did not change drastically. Tools improved slowly, but the main method remained the same: patience, observation, and respect for the natural patterns of the land. Metal points on spears made hunting more efficient, but people continued walking the same paths, listening for the same sounds, and reading the same tracks pressed into the soil. The land itself remained their guide. The people continued to follow the quiet rhythm of the land as the seasons changed, observing the subtle patterns of animal movement that had been repeated for many generations. They learned that some animals stayed near water, others roamed across the plains, and some remained within dense forests where sunlight barely reached the ground. Each species had its own habits, and the people moved with patience and precision, understanding that success in hunting depended on knowing these habits rather than forcing their will upon the animals. Small animals were hunted daily, often in the same areas where edible roots and berries grew. People knew that rabbits and hares followed the shadows of shrubs, moving from one patch of cover to another as they searched for food. The hunters walked slowly, following faint tracks, and waited quietly near burrows or under low branches. They kept their bodies low to the ground, moving hands and feet deliberately so as not to startle the animals. When a rabbit or small mammal appeared, the hunter would reach carefully for a simple tool, a short spear, a throwing stick, or a smooth stone. The capture was brief and efficient. The animal was not wasted. It provided not only meat but bones for tools, fur for clothing or bedding, and fat that could be used for warmth or cooking. Bird hunting required a different rhythm. Birds traveled in flocks, often feeding near water or in open fields. Hunters approached slowly, taking advantage of tall grasses or shrubs as cover. Sometimes they used nets woven from reeds or plant fibers, setting them near areas where birds frequently landed. The people understood the flight patterns of each species. They knew which birds fed early in the morning, which moved to water at midday, and which returned to nests in the evening. This knowledge, passed from one generation to the next, allowed them to gather birds without disturbing their future breeding. Hunting in this way was not hurried. It relied on observation, timing, and calm coordination. Larger animals required cooperative effort. When deer or wild goats moved through valleys or along riverbanks, the hunters worked together to guide the animals toward areas where capture was possible. These drives took careful planning. Groups would move slowly through forests or along hillsides, positioning themselves along natural corridors. One group might move silently to block an escape route, while another waited at the end of a narrow pass. They used no loud commands, only simple hand gestures and subtle shifts in body position to signal one another. This quiet communication ensured the hunt proceeded efficiently and without unnecessary effort. The people understood the seasons deeply. During the warmer months, animals were more active in open fields, moving to shade or water in predictable ways. Hunters adjusted their routines to these patterns. In cooler months, animals moved less and stayed closer to shelter, requiring hunters to follow different paths and adjust the timing of their movements. The rhythm of hunting matched the rhythm of gathering, and both were deeply connected to the cycles of the land. Tracking animals became a refined skill. The hunters studied footprints, droppings, and signs of feeding. They could tell the size, age, and sometimes even the health of an animal by subtle differences in tracks pressed into soft soil. They noticed which direction an animal traveled and estimated how recently it had passed. Rocks, fallen leaves, and twigs were observed for disturbances that hinted at movement. All of these details were absorbed without rush, becoming part of the hunter's quiet understanding of the environment. The tools used in hunting were simple but effective. Spears were sharpened with stone or bone points. Throwing sticks were balanced to match the strength of the arm. Nets and snares were woven from fibers that were flexible yet strong, allowing for repeated use over many seasons. Each tool was maintained carefully, repaired when needed, and handled with respect. These simple tools reflected the slow accumulation of practical knowledge over generations, designed to work in harmony with the natural movements of animals rather than to overpower them. Hunting also required knowledge of animal behavior beyond mere tracks. The hunters observed sounds. The distant rustle of leaves could signal the presence of a deer. The sudden call of birds often indicated a predator had approached or another animal had moved unexpectedly. They watched for feeding patterns, noting which plants or seeds animals preferred and how this preference guided movement across the landscape. They understood that certain behaviors repeated reliably, and this repetition became the foundation for planning hunts. Even during the cold months, hunting continued in modified ways. Some animals entered burrows or sheltered in dense brush. Hunters approached these areas with quiet observation. They would wait near the entrances, sometimes for hours, remaining patient until the animal emerged. Small game, like rabbits or rodents, were often easier to capture at this time, as movement slowed and food scarcity made them more predictable. The people did not overhunt. They took only what was needed to feed the group, leaving sufficient animals to sustain future populations. Children were gradually included in hunting practices. First, they followed adults at a safe distance, learning to move quietly and observe without disturbing the land. Then they handled smaller tools, practiced throwing sticks, and learned to recognize tracks and droppings. Over time, they acquired the same skills as adults: patience, precision, and calm awareness. Hunting became a shared practice, deeply embedded in the community's daily rhythm. Hunting in forested areas required additional skill. Dense undergrowth and fallen logs slowed movement and required careful attention to footing. Hunters adapted by stepping lightly, shifting weight gradually, and scanning the space around them continuously. Birds and small mammals were common here, but sometimes larger animals passed quietly through narrow openings. The hunters recognized subtle differences: the sound of heavy breathing, the movement of leaves, the shadow of an animal moving behind a tree. Each small sign guided their actions and ensured that hunting remained safe and effective. River and coastal areas provided another layer of hunting practice. People observed the movement of fish in shallow waters, birds landing near the water's edge, and mammals that came to drink. Hunters approached slowly, often wading carefully into shallow water or waiting among reeds. Nets, traps, and simple spears allowed them to catch fish or birds efficiently. The methods were repetitive but reliable, refined over generations. and carefully adapted to local conditions. Timing was essential. Early morning and late afternoon often offered the best opportunities. The people understood the relationship between hunting and storage. Meats were consumed immediately when fresh, but excess could be dried or smoked over slow fires to preserve it. Bones were kept for tools, and hides were softened and dried for clothing or shelter. Fat was carefully rendered and stored for use in cooking or as fuel for lamps. Nothing was wasted, and the careful use of every part of the animal ensured that the community remained sustainable. This slow, deliberate approach reflected the same principles applied to gathering plants: patience, observation, and respect for the land cycles. Animals themselves shaped movement patterns for the community. Seasonal migrations of herds dictated where hunters traveled and when. Small animals, moving through familiar feeding routes, guided daily movements near fields and forests. Birds and insects provided clues about the health of plants and the timing of food availability. The people responded to these signs in quiet, repetitive ways that reinforced a steady pattern of survival. Each action was informed by careful observation and a calm understanding of the natural world. Large group hunts occurred during times when certain animals moved through narrow corridors or were forced into predictable paths by seasonal changes. These hunts required coordination among multiple hunters, often over several kilometers of terrain. The participants used natural features, ridges, cliffs, and dense vegetation, to guide the animals slowly toward areas where capture was feasible. These hunts were not rushed. They relied on patience, quiet communication, and slow, deliberate movements that minimized disturbance and maximized efficiency. When animals were captured, the processing was methodical. Meat was divided, bones were collected, hides were prepared, and fat was rendered. The process took several hours, often involving multiple members of the community. Children learned by participating in small ways, observing adults, and gradually taking on more responsibilities. The care with which each step was performed reflected the community's deep understanding that survival depended on both skill and respect for the environment. As the seasons turned, hunting cycles intertwined with gathering cycles. In some areas, hunting was dominant during colder months, while plant gathering was more central during warmer months. In other areas, the two activities occurred simultaneously, complementing each other in a continuous rhythm. The community's life was organized around these cycles, with predictable patterns that guided daily movement, work, and rest. Hunters also learned from observation of predators. By watching foxes, wolves, or large birds of prey, the people gained insight into animal behavior and terrain. Predators often revealed where prey concentrated, which helped humans locate small game. Similarly, observing how animals hid or defended themselves taught hunters how to move quietly and approach without disturbing the land unnecessarily. This knowledge accumulated slowly, passed from generation to generation, creating a rich understanding of the environment. Over time, the combination of plant gathering and hunting formed the foundation of early civilization. Communities remained small but resilient, capable of surviving harsh seasons and variable conditions. They did not rely on single sources of food. Instead, they observed the land, the animals, and the plants carefully, integrating this information into daily routines that were calm, steady, and sustainable. Survival depended not on force or haste, but on careful attention, patience, and the repeated practice of simple, reliable actions. Even as the land changed, the people's relationship with animals and plants continued in predictable patterns. Migration, growth cycles, and seasonal shifts guided movements. Hunters and gatherers observed quietly, moved slowly, and acted deliberately. The rhythm of the day, from dawn to dusk, from the quiet of morning to the fading light of evening, was shaped by the cycle's life around them. Each step, each gathering, each hunt forming a steady, ongoing story of survival. The people of early settlements relied on a small collection of carefully made tools, each shaped to help them gather plants, dig roots, collect seeds, or hunt animals. These tools were not elaborate or ornamental. They were simple, practical, and designed to work with the rhythms of the land rather than against it. Over time, they became extensions of the hands, and each person learned to handle them with care and skill. The creation, use, and maintenance of these tools formed a central part of daily life, blending with the cycles of gathering and hunting that structured the communities. The first and most common tools were digging sticks. These sticks were made from straight branches, often selected for their hardness and smoothness. They were used to loosen soil gently before lifting roots, tubers, or bulbs. Some were shaped with a slight curve or pointed tip to make lifting easier. The people tested each stick, bending it slightly to ensure it could withstand pressure without breaking. A well-chosen digging stick allowed a gatherer to reach roots deep in the soil without disturbing nearby plants or damaging the roots themselves. Digging sticks were carried in hand or tucked into simple straps across the back, ready to use whenever a suitable patch of soil was found. Alongside digging sticks, the people often used flat stones. These stones served multiple purposes. They were used to grind seeds into meal or paste, break nuts, sharpen other tools, and even crush fibrous plant material to make simple mats or rope. Stones were selected for their weight, texture, and durability. Smooth, flat stones were ideal for pounding seeds, while harder, rougher stones were better for cracking nuts. Each stone became part of a repeating routine, carried from one gathering spot to another, cleaned, dried, and stored carefully after use. Baskets were another essential tool. Woven from reeds, grasses, or flexible branches, they allowed the transport of large quantities of roots, leaves, nuts, and small animals without damaging them. Basket weaving was learned slowly, and baskets were reinforced over time with additional fibers to prevent tearing. They came in many shapes and sizes. Some were deep and narrow for carrying roots and tubers. Others were wide and shallow for berries and seeds. Baskets often had handles, sometimes made from braided fibers, so that they could be carried across shoulders, leaving hands free to lift plants or handle small animals. The careful construction and repair of baskets ensured that they lasted through many seasons. For collecting berries, seeds, and delicate leaves, smaller containers were also used. Hollowed plant stems, woven pouches, and small clay vessels provided a way to protect fragile items during transport. People learned which containers worked best for each type of food. Fragile berries were placed in soft, small baskets or pouches, while firmer nuts or roots could be carried in larger, heavier baskets. The careful handling of these items prevented waste and ensured that gathered foods remained edible for as long as possible. Tools for cutting were equally important. Simple knives made from sharpened stones or pieces of flint allowed people to cut leaves, roots, or fibrous stems. These knives were often attached to small wooden handles for grip, but the blade itself was formed by careful flaking of stone to produce a sharp edge. These knives were used not only for gathering plants, but also for preparing animals after a hunt. They could remove hides, slice meat, or carve simple tools. Knives were cleaned and stored carefully, often wrapped in leaves or fibers to protect their edges. For hunting, additional tools were essential. Spears were among the most commonly used. They were made from straight branches with tips sharpened to a point, or fitted with stone or bone points. Spears were effective for small and medium animals and could be thrown or used for thrusting. Some spears were lightweight and flexible, suitable for throwing, while others were heavier and stronger, better suited for close, range hunting or larger animals. Hunters learned to balance weight and length, practicing until the spear became an extension of the arm. Throwing sticks, sometimes called boomerangs in later cultures, were another type of hunting tool. They were curved pieces of wood, shaped to travel straight or slightly asked when thrown. They could stun or drive animals, particularly birds or small mammals, without causing extensive damage to the meat. People learned the rhythm of throwing and retrieving, practicing repeatedly to develop accuracy. These sticks were carried easily, often tucked into the same straps used for baskets or digging sticks. Nets and snares provided another method of hunting. Nets were woven from plant fibers, sometimes strengthened with additional cordage. They were light and flexible, allowing the capture of birds, fish, or small mammals. Nets were set across narrow paths or near water sources where animals frequently moved. Snares were simple loops made from cordage or fibers, placed over burrows or trails. When an animal passed through, the loop tightened gently, capturing it without breaking the fibers. Both nets and snares required careful placement, patience, and observation of animal behavior. For grinding seeds, nuts, and roots, mortars and pestles were also used. These could be made from hard stones, wood, or even hollowed logs. A flat stone or wooden pestle was pressed or ground against the surface of the mortar, breaking the food into small, usable pieces. This process was slow but effective, and it allowed communities to produce meal, paste, or flour from collected plants. These tools were essential in preparing food for storage or immediate consumption, providing the energy needed for long days of gathering or hunting. Fires themselves were tools. They were used not only for warmth and cooking, but also for preparing certain plant foods. Roots could be roasted, leaves dried, and seeds toasted to improve taste and shelf life. Smoke could be used to preserve meats and keep insects away from stored foods. People learned how to build fires safely, using stones to contain embers, controlling the burn rate, and managing smoke to avoid disturbing the surrounding area. Fire also played a role in hunting. It could be used carefully to flush animals toward traps or paths. In addition to these tools, simple shelters and mats were part of daily life. Mats woven from reeds or plant fibers provided a clean surface for sorting and drying foods. Simple, lean, or temporary shelters protected people during long days of gathering or hunting, allowing them to rest without leaving gathered foods exposed to sun, rain, or wind. Even these simple constructions reflected careful observation of materials and environmental conditions, shaped by repeated experience. Tools were repaired as often as they were used. A cracked basket was reinforced with additional fibers. A chipped stone knife was resharpened with another flake of stone. Wooden handles were smoothed or replaced. Each repair was done calmly, methodically, and with attention to detail. The tools were valued as essential parts of life, enabling the community to maintain steady cycles of gathering and hunting without waste or unnecessary effort. Some tools were adapted to local environments. In river areas, small wooden boats or rafts were used to reach islands or shallow areas where plants grew or animals gathered. Simple paddles were carved to move efficiently through water. In forested areas, poles were sharpened to reach high branches or to knock down fruits. In open plains, long sticks or ropes could be used to corner small animals. Each tool was matched to the land and the task, reflecting deep observation and practical problem solving. Children learned the use of tools gradually, beginning with light, safe implements. They carried small baskets, practiced weaving simple nets, or learned to sharpen small stones. As their skill grew, they used heavier digging sticks, handled knives under supervision, and practiced throwing sticks or spears with guidance. This slow, repetitive learning embedded knowledge deeply, ensuring that each generation could survive and maintain the routines of gathering and hunting. Over time, communities developed small improvements in tools based on repeated experience. Sharper stones, sturdier baskets, and better balanced spears emerged naturally from trial and observation. But these changes remained small and practical, never altering the calm rhythm of daily life. Tools were always extensions of the hands, designed to work with the land, plants, and animals rather than to dominate them. Hunting and gathering together shaped the daily movements of the community. Tools allowed more efficiency, but success depended on patience, observation, and knowledge passed through generations. People walked slowly along familiar paths, stopping to test soil, inspect tracks, or examine plants. They carried baskets, digging sticks, knives, and spears as part of a daily routine. They rested, repaired tools, and prepared food, repeating these actions in a cycle guided by nature. Through careful attention to tools, the community could store food for long periods. Roots, seeds, nuts, and meats could be prepared and preserved using baskets, stones, knives, and fire. The integration of tools into daily routines allowed the group to survive through cold months, dry seasons, and periods of scarcity. Every tool had its place, every action its rhythm, and the cycle of life proceeded in calm, continuous motion. The combination of tools for gathering and hunting shaped early civilizations more than any single action. Baskets, knives, digging sticks, spears, nets, and stones allowed people to interact with the land in controlled, steady ways. They could lift roots without destroying plants, grind seeds into usable food, catch birds or small mammals, and preserve resources for the entire community. These tools were not just objects. They were part of the larger system of survival, observation, and slow adaptation that defined daily life. As the generations passed, knowledge of tools deepened. Young people learned the precise angle for sharpening a stone knife, the right pressure for pounding seeds, and the correct way to weave a basket that would last several seasons. Hunters learned which spears worked best for specific animals, how to position nets effectively, and how to set snares for small mammals. Tools were never used haphazardly. Each action was deliberate, slow and careful, reflecting the calm understanding that life depended on consistent attention to detail. Even with the introduction of new materials, the basic principles remained. Tools were lightweight where needed, durable where strength was required, and simple enough to be repaired quickly. They were adapted to the environment, whether river, forest, or plain. They were taught from one generation to the next through observation and repetition, and they were used in harmony with the natural rhythms of plants and animals. The daily life of early people revolved around these tools. From dawn until dusk, from gathering leaves and berries to digging roots, from crushing seeds to preparing hunted animals, tools guided every movement. They allowed for the careful, calm, and sustainable use of the land, and they shaped the way communities survived for generations. Every tool had a story, every technique a lesson, and every use reinforced the deep connection between people and the natural world. Early people spent much of their time maintaining, shaping, and preparing the tools that supported their daily lives. Each item was created with care, understanding its intended purpose, the materials available, and the environment where it would be used. A single well-crafted tool could last many seasons if properly maintained, so attention to detail was crucial. Tools were not seen as disposable, they were extensions of the body, allowing humans to interact with plants, roots, seeds, and animals effectively. Wood was the most common base material. Branches were selected from trees that grew in local forests or near riverbanks. People observed which types of wood were straight, strong, and resistant to splitting. They collected branches that were mature but not brittle, allowing them to be shaped into spears, digging sticks, or handles for knives. The selection process involved careful observation. A branch that bent without breaking was ideal for a throwing spear, while a harder, denser branch was better for a digging stick or club. Even small differences in wood density could affect the performance of the tool. Stone was another essential material. People learned to identify types of stone suitable for sharp edges, durable surfaces, and grinding tasks. Flint, chert, and obsidian were common where available. Stones were struck carefully with other stones to produce flakes with sharp edges. These flakes were shaped into knives, scrapers, or points for spears and arrows. The shaping process required a delicate balance of force and precision. Too much pressure could break the stone, too little would leave a tool ineffective. These sharp stones were often mounted onto wooden handles with plant fibers or animal sinews, creating effective cutting tools that were simple yet reliable. Bone and antler were used when stone or wood was less suitable. Bones were hollowed or shaped to create needles for weaving, hooks for fishing, or small pointed tools for scraping hides. Antlers, often shed naturally by deer or similar animals, provided durable, lightweight material for points on spears or digging tools. Early people learned to shape these materials slowly, filing or scraping them to the correct size and edge. These tools were highly valued because they were strong, light, and could perform specialized tasks that stone or wood could not. Plant fibers were essential for weaving baskets, nets, ropes, and straps. Fibers were harvested from grasses, reeds, or tree bark. They were softened and sometimes soaked in water to make them flexible. People twisted or braided fibers carefully, creating cordage strong enough to bind spear points, secure baskets, or form nets for trapping small animals. Fiber work required patience, and even a small knot could be the difference between a secure trap and a lost catch. Many children learned basic weaving by observing adults, starting with simple patterns and gradually progressing to more complex basket designs or netting techniques. Baskets were both tools and containers. They were shaped for specific uses: narrow, deep baskets for carrying roots, wide, shallow ones for seeds or berries. The weaving process required steady hands and attention to detail. Each basket was checked repeatedly as it was constructed to ensure strength and durability. Over time, repeated use smoothed rough edges, strengthened fibers, and shaped the basket to the hands of its owner. These baskets allowed gathered foods to be transported without damage, supporting long excursions across fields, forests, and riverbanks. Knives and cutting tools were maintained carefully. After use, blades made of stone, bone, or metal were cleaned, sharpened, and stored in a safe place. Wooden handles were smoothed and checked for cracks, and bindings were tightened to ensure stability. A dull knife could slow daily work, damage food, or cause injury, so keeping cutting tools sharp was a constant task. Hunters used knives to prepare meat immediately after a hunt, slicing hides carefully to preserve them for clothing or shelter. Knives were also used to carve wooden implements, dig roots, or cut fibers for weaving. Digging sticks were another focus of maintenance. The pointed end was smoothed and shaped to penetrate soil efficiently. Some were reinforced with strips of bark or fibers to prevent splitting. Hunters and gatherers carried these sticks daily, using them to uncover roots, dig burrows for small animals, or move obstacles during hunting or foraging trips. The balance of weight, length, and hardness was learned over years of experience. A well-made digging stick could make the difference between a successful day of gathering and a difficult, exhausting one. Spears, both for hunting and defense, were crafted with precision. Long, straight branches were selected, the ends sharpened, and points attached with sinew fibers or resin. Spears were tested for balance, ensuring that they could be thrown accurately or used in close. Range hunting without excessive effort. Hunters often carried multiple spears, adjusting the tip for the type of animal being pursued. Lightweight spears were used for birds and small mammals, while heavier spears targeted medium-sized game. Over time, repeated use improved throwing accuracy and hand-eye coordination, making the spear an extension of the hunter's arm. Throwing sticks were crafted with specific curves to match the throw of the arm. They could travel straight or in an arc to drive animals toward hunters or to stun birds and small mammals. Each stick was tested before use, with slight adjustments made to weight distribution or curve. Like spears, throwing sticks were maintained carefully, smoothed after use, and stored where they would not warp or crack. Hunters developed muscle memory through practice, allowing them to throw efficiently even during long hunting trips. Nets were woven from plant fibers and were used for hunting small animals and birds, as well as for fishing. The weaving process required precision, with consistent spacing between knots and careful attention to tension. Nets were carried folded, sometimes tied to the body, and deployed when animals entered a predictable path. Traps and snares were simple extensions of the same principles. A loop of cord could be placed over a burrow or along a trail. When an animal passed, the loop tightened, capturing it gently but effectively. These methods required patience and observation, as the success of the trap depended on the correct placement informed by knowledge of animal habits. Mortars and pestles were simple but essential. Stones, wood, or hollowed logs were used to grind seeds, roots, and nuts. The repetitive motion of pounding or grinding broke down tough plant materials into food suitable for eating or storage. Mortars were often anchored with larger stones or buried slightly to remain stable, while pestles were shaped for comfortable grip and long-term use. This simple tool allowed early communities to convert hard seeds into edible flour, supplementing diets during seasons when other foods were scarce. Fire was a tool in itself. It was used to cook meat, roast roots, dry leaves and seeds, and preserve animal fat or hides. Early people learned to build controlled fires using stones, dry twigs, and plant fibers. The smoke could keep insects away and even influence the behavior of animals, guiding them toward or away from certain areas. Fire allowed food to be stored for longer periods, made tough foods edible, and provided warmth during long hunting or gathering trips. It was one of the most versatile tools, essential for survival in all seasons. Children learned tool use gradually. They began with simple baskets, sticks, or soft stones, practicing careful handling. Over time, they were introduced to more precise tasks, weaving fibers into stronger cords, sharpening small stones for cutting, practicing throwing sticks, and learning to observe animal tracks for placing snares or nets. This slow, guided learning ensured that each generation inherited both the physical tools and the skills necessary to use them effectively. Tool maintenance was constant. Worn baskets were reinforced. Dull knives were resharpened. Fibers were replaced on nets and snares. Wooden handles were smoothed and treated with oils or plant resins to prevent drying and splitting. Spears were checked for balance and strength. Digging sticks were inspected for cracks. The care of tools was as important as their use. Without maintenance, even the most well-crafted item would fail, disrupting the rhythm of daily life. Even small tools had specialized uses. Hollowed gourds carried water, small bowls of clay stored seeds, sharpened bones were used for scraping hides, and simple wooden boards were used for processing plant materials. Each object served a practical purpose, designed to make tasks more efficient without requiring unnecessary energy. The combination of these tools created a network of support for every daily activity, whether gathering food, hunting animals, or preparing meals for the community. Tools were adapted to specific environments. In river areas, shallow wooden scoops or paddles were used to gather aquatic plants or fish. In forests, sticks were shaped to knock down fruits or probe burrows. In open plains, long sticks and throwing tools were used to drive small animals into traps. Every tool reflected observation and practice, shaped by repeated exposure to local conditions. People moved through their environment with tools as extensions of their hands, acting with precision and care. The use of tools also shaped social patterns. People worked together, passing baskets, sharing knives, and coordinating hunts using spears and nets. Children learned by observation and practice. Elders guided tool preparation, repair, and use. The community functioned as a single, coordinated system, with each person's tools supporting the broader survival of the group. Through repeated practice, early people developed an intuitive understanding of how to combine tools with the environment. A digging stick could loosen soil while a basket carried the harvested roots. A knife could process meat while a fire dried seeds. A net could trap birds while a spear protected the hunters. Each tool had its place, and the combination of tools allowed people to thrive in varied landscapes, adapting to seasonal changes and the habits of plants and animals. As the seasons changed, early communities followed a slow, repeating rhythm that guided their movement, work, and rest. They did not travel aimlessly. Instead, they observed the land carefully, noting where plants were ripening, where animals were feeding, and which areas could sustain repeated use. Each year followed patterns that had been learned through generations of careful observation. The knowledge of these cycles became central to daily life. guiding when to gather roots, when to harvest seeds, when to hunt small or large animals, and when to store foods for the months ahead. During the early warm season, the people moved across open plains, along riverbanks, and through forests to gather the first shoots, tender leaves, and edible roots. They preferred early mornings, when the ground was moist and plants were firm. With baskets on their backs or in their hands, they walked slowly, testing the soil with digging sticks and examining each plant carefully. They pulled roots gently, brushed soil from tubers, and placed them in baskets, leaving some behind to ensure future growth. These movements were deliberate, methodical, and calm. There was no rush. Each step was measured, each plant treated with care. As the warm season continued, the people began to focus on seeds and fruits. They moved through tall grasses, across open fields, and along forest edges, selecting plants at the precise stage when seeds were full, berries were ripe, and fruits had reached their peak flavor. They carried small knives to cut stems or twist berries from branches. Nets and pouches protected delicate foods during transport. Some seeds were collected for immediate consumption, while others were stored in dry, cool areas to last through colder months. The repetition of these routines allowed the community to anticipate supply needs and ensure that stored food would last. During these warm months, hunting was incorporated into daily movement. Small animals were easier to catch when vegetation was dense, and birds and insects were abundant. Hunters walked through fields and forests quietly, observing tracks, listening to sounds, and following the subtle signs of animal movement. Small traps and snares were set along predictable paths. Nets were deployed near water or feeding areas. Spears were carried in hand or strapped to the body for sudden action. These activities were coordinated with gathering, so that while some members collected plants, others could quietly observe and capture animals without disturbing the ecosystem. As the warm season transitioned to the cooler months, the rhythm of life shifted. People adjusted their daily routes, moving closer to areas where water remained accessible and plants continued to provide food. They focused on nuts, roots, and hardy plants that could be stored. In forests, they collected nuts from the ground, testing each one by touch to ensure quality. Roots that had grown deep during warmer months were dug carefully with sharpened sticks. Leaves from resilient plants were gathered for flavoring or medicine. The cooler season required careful observation, because frost and shorter days changed both plant growth and animal behavior. Hunting also shifted during these months. Animals moved closer to sheltered areas and concentrated near remaining water sources. Hunters followed tracks more carefully, moved more slowly, and observed the behavior of flocks or herds over longer distances. Small mammals, birds, and fish continued to provide daily sustenance, while occasional larger animals were pursued with coordinated group strategies. Hunters relied on the balance between patience and precision, making use of spears, throwing sticks, nets, and traps in ways that matched the animal's size, speed, and habits. People also began storing harvested food more intensively. Roots and tubers were cleaned, dried, or roasted to extend shelf life. Nuts were shelled and stored in woven baskets or clay vessels. Seeds were ground into meal or paste for long-term consumption. Meat from hunted animals was dried over slow fires, and hides were preserved for clothing, shelter, and tools. Fat was rendered and stored for cooking and lighting. These storage practices required careful organization and planning. Each item was labeled in memory, often by location or container type, to ensure access when needed during the coldest months. Shelter and rest became more structured during colder periods. People constructed temporary shelters near key gathering or hunting sites. Simple lean-tos, mats woven from reeds or fibers, and shelters from branches or hides provided rest and protection from weather. The structures were designed to last for weeks or months and could be dismantled and moved when necessary. While shelter provided comfort, it also allowed for the organization of tools and food supplies. Baskets, Digging sticks, knives and stiggers were stored nearby, ready for the next day's activities. Daily routines remained steady. Early mornings were spent observing the land. The condition of soil, water, and plant growth guided decisions about where to dig roots, collect nuts, or set traps. Midday was often used for processing gathered food, repairing tools, and preparing meat or hides. Afternoons involved light gathering or hunting, walking slowly through familiar paths to observe animal movement and plant ripening. Evenings were spent near fires, drying foods, repairing baskets, weaving fibers, sharpening stones, and teaching children the skills they would need in coming years. The repetition of these routines created a calm, continuous rhythm that structured life throughout the year. Children gradually learned to anticipate seasonal changes. They observed which plants ripened first in spring, which animals moved across the plains during summer, and which roots were easiest to find during autumn. They learned to carry small baskets, handle light digging sticks, and observe animal tracks. Over time, they acquired the full skill set needed to survive independently. Lessons were taught slowly and quietly. Children followed adults on excursions, watched closely, and participated in simple tasks. Knowledge was transmitted through demonstration, repetition, and observation rather than formal instruction. The community also relied on simple communication during hunting and gathering. Hand signals, subtle gestures, and quiet movements allowed coordination without disturbing animals or plants. For larger group hunts, some members guided animals toward natural barriers, while others waited at narrow passes with spears or nets. When small animals or birds were trapped, the process was calm and precise, avoiding unnecessary disturbance. These routines were repeated season after season, gradually forming a stable pattern of survival that required cooperation, patience, and careful observation. Early people also developed an understanding of the relationship between plants, animals, and weather. Rainfall, frost, wind, and sun influenced the growth of roots, the ripening of berries, and the movement of animals. Hunters and gatherers observed these patterns carefully, adjusting daily routines accordingly. For example, after a heavy rain, mud made tracks visible for longer periods, aiding hunters in tracking small mammals. Similarly, frost could preserve certain roots, making them easier to dig without damage. These observations were embedded in daily life, forming a quiet, natural calendar that guided work, rest, and movement. During migrations of large animals, hunters adjusted routines. Seasonal movements were observed over weeks or months. Early people noticed the size of herds, the direction of movement, and the type of terrain favored by different species. They positioned themselves carefully, coordinating with other hunters to maximize efficiency while minimizing effort. Tools were used thoughtfully: spears for medium animals, nets or snares for small ones, and traps along predictable paths. Large-scale hunts were rare but planned carefully, using natural topography to guide animals toward capture zones. Even in the coldest months, some gathering continued. Evergreen plants, hardy roots, and seeds could still be collected. Hunters followed the faint trails of small mammals, birds, and fish. Snow and frost slowed movement, but careful observation allowed people to identify signs of activity. These continued routines ensured a consistent supply of food, while also maintaining knowledge of the land, animal behavior, and plant cycles. Meals were simple but nutritious. Roots were roasted or boiled, seeds ground into paste, nuts eaten raw or crushed, and meat preserved or freshly cooked. Foods were shared communally, and portions were managed to maintain energy throughout long days of activity. Even small items such as tender shoots or leaves were valued. Nothing was wasted, and every resource collected or hunted contributed to the survival and stability of the community. As the cycles of the year continued, early communities learned to organize their movements and activities in ways that maximized the use of available resources while minimizing risk. The pursuit of food, both through gathering and hunting, required careful observation of the land, patience, and quiet coordination. Over generations, Knowledge accumulated about which areas provided reliable supplies of water, which regions had abundant plants at certain times, and how animals moved across the landscape. Water sources were central to daily life. Rivers, streams, ponds, and seasonal pools were not only vital for drinking, but also determined the location of plants and the movement of animals. Early people learned to remember the location of each water source and its seasonal changes. During the dry season, smaller pools might disappear, concentrating animals around the remaining water. Hunters and gatherers would follow these concentrations carefully, noting the tracks leading to the water. During the rainy season, temporary streams or flooded areas could make certain plants more accessible, but might also scatter animals. Understanding these dynamics shaped the daily routines of both hunting and gathering. Shelter was another essential part of survival. Early people built temporary structures that were practical, lightweight, and adaptable. Simple lean, toes, made from branches and leaves, provided protection from sun, wind, and rain. Mats woven from reeds or fibers offered a dry, comfortable surface for processing gathered food or resting after hunting. When near rivers or lakes, shelters were sometimes constructed slightly elevated to avoid flooding. In forested areas, natural clearings were chosen for ease of access and visibility. The construction of shelter was always guided by the surrounding environment, with materials sourced locally and shaped simply for immediate use. Hunting large animals required careful planning and coordination. Individuals rarely attempted large hunts alone. Instead, small groups worked together to guide animals toward natural features that could aid capture, such as narrow valleys, steep ridges, or water edges. The group would move slowly, sometimes for several hours or days, positioning themselves to block escape routes. Some members would flush the animals gently, using sticks, fire, or noise in a controlled way, while others waited with spears, nets, or snares. These hunts demanded patience, communication, and observation, and success often depended more on strategy and positioning than on speed or force. Small animal hunting occurred more frequently and was incorporated into daily movements. Rabbits, hares, birds, and rodents were followed quietly, using knowledge of their feeding habits and burrow locations. Hunters observed the subtle signs left behind tracks, droppings, chewed plants, and disturbed soil. Tools such as throwing sticks, nets, and simple spears allowed capture without unnecessary effort. The routine was methodical, with hunters walking slowly, scanning the environment, and adjusting their actions based on what they observed. Nets and traps were often used to supplement hunting during periods when animals were more difficult to find. Nets woven from plant fibers could be placed near water or along paths frequently traveled by birds and small mammals. Snares made from fibers or thin vines were positioned at burrow entrances or along trails. When an animal passed through, the loop would tighten gently, holding it securely until it could be collected. Placement required experience, observation, and knowledge of animal behavior, often learned gradually by children as they followed adults. Daily routines were organized around these activities. Early mornings were often spent observing the land. Gatherers checked the condition of soil, the ripeness of plants, and signs of animal activity. Hunters noted tracks, animal calls, and movement patterns. Midday was often reserved for processing food, repairing tools, and maintaining shelters. Afternoons included light gathering or hunting excursions, following familiar paths, to collect what was needed without overexertion. Evenings were for communal meals, repair work, and quiet instruction for children, learning the skills of survival. These routines created a predictable, calm rhythm that structured life across the seasons. Children were gradually introduced to hunting and gathering techniques. At first, they carried small baskets, observed tracks, and learned to identify edible plants. Over time, they handled light tools, participated in setting snares, or helped prepare harvested foods. They learned the timing of plant growth, the movement of animals, and the importance of patience. Lessons were given through demonstration and repetition. allowing knowledge to be absorbed naturally without urgency. By adolescence, children were fully capable of contributing to daily subsistence, reinforcing the continuity of survival skills across generations. Tools were maintained and adapted continuously. Spears and throwing sticks were sharpened or balanced carefully. Nets were repaired and reinforced. Baskets were strengthened, and knives were kept sharp. Wooden handles were treated to prevent cracking, and stones were selected for grinding, cutting, or scraping based on durability and size. Tools were chosen for efficiency, simplicity, and reliability. They were used in ways that complemented natural patterns, rather than forcing humans to act against the land or its animals. Seasonal planning became increasingly important as the community grew more familiar with the landscape. During the warm season, routes were chosen to maximize access to ripening plants, flowing water, and animal concentrations. During the cooler season, movements were adjusted toward areas that retained edible roots, hardy seeds, and animals sheltering near water. People observed rainfall, wind patterns, and temperature changes to predict the availability of food. Seasonal planning reduced risk, conserved energy, and ensured that resources could be gathered, stored, and used efficiently. Cooperative hunting was often reserved for larger or more challenging prey. Groups would coordinate movements, silently communicating through gestures or subtle signals. Natural features like narrow passes, hills, or riverbanks were used strategically to guide animals toward hunters waiting with spears or nets. The process could take hours or even days, requiring patience and calm persistence. Success depended on the careful placement of individuals, observation of animal behavior, and understanding of terrain. These cooperative hunts reinforced social bonds and allowed the community to secure meat efficiently while avoiding waste. Hunting and gathering were always balanced. While large hunts provided occasional meat, daily survival relied on a steady intake of plant foods, small animals, fish and birds. Baskets, nets, digging sticks, knives, and spears were integrated into these routines. Tools enabled efficiency, but knowledge, patience, and observation were more important than any single implement. People moved slowly, adjusting their actions based on subtle signs in the environment. They followed predictable rhythms, guided by the cycles of plant growth, animal movement, and seasonal weather patterns. Water was also used in practical ways beyond drinking. People waded into shallow pools to catch fish, collected edible plants from riverbanks, and observed aquatic animals for food. Some plants were easier to harvest near water, while certain small mammals and birds relied on river edges for drinking and feeding. Water shaped daily routes, influencing when and where people gathered food or hunted animals. Understanding the behavior of water, from seasonal flooding to low summer pools, became an essential part of survival. Food storage and preservation were central to seasonal planning. Roots were dug, cleaned, and stored in dry locations. Nuts were shelled and stored in baskets or clay containers. Seeds were ground into paste or meal. Meat from hunted animals was dried or smoked over slow fires. Hides and fats were preserved for clothing, shelter, or fuel. Storage ensured that food would last during periods when gathering was difficult or hunting was less successful. These practices required calm, methodical work, often taking hours each day, and depended on careful organization and knowledge of material properties. Tools, movement, and storage practices together created a cycle that structured life. Daily routines were shaped by observation, the ripening of a berry, the direction of an animal track, the moisture in the soil, or the depth of water in a river. Tasks were performed slowly and deliberately, ensuring efficiency while minimizing waste. Children learned these cycles through participation and observation. Elders passed knowledge along quietly, demonstrating techniques and correcting mistakes gently. The repetition of these routines created a stable, sustainable rhythm of life, allowing communities to survive over many years. Even in the harshest weather, routines continued. Snow or frost changed hunting strategies. Small animals were tracked by footprints in snow. Water sources were located beneath ice or near springs. and hardy plants provided the main sustenance. Hunters adjusted tools and strategies to conditions. Spears and throwing sticks were used cautiously on slippery ground. Nets were reinforced to hold captured animals more securely. Digging sticks were modified for frozen soil. Every aspect of daily life adapted to the changing environment while maintaining the calm, steady patterns that ensured survival. Large-scale gatherings occurred periodically, when groups traveled to specific locations to harvest abundant food sources or to hunt migratory animals. These events required planning, coordination, and cooperation. Tools were distributed efficiently, roles were assigned, and movements were carefully choreographed to take advantage of natural features. Even in these larger efforts, the principle of slow, deliberate action remained. People moved methodically, observed carefully, and used tools with precision to maximize efficiency while minimizing effort. The same principles applied to everyday movement and exploration. Paths were chosen based on soil conditions, plant growth, and animal activity. Hunters and gatherers moved in a calm rhythm, avoiding unnecessary noise or sudden actions that might disturb food sources. Every step was purposeful, every observation recorded in memory. Over time, these patterns became ingrained, forming an internal map of the land and its resources. Knowledge of paths, water sources, seasonal plant growth, and animal behavior was passed from generation to generation. Children gradually took on more responsibility in these routines. They learned to track animals by observing footprints and droppings, carry baskets full of gathered food, weave simple nets, sharpen small tools, and assist with processing and storage. By the time they reached adolescence, they were fully capable of contributing to the daily work of the community. The calm rhythm of life, structured by tools, routines, and seasonal planning, became second nature. Simple tools, such as digging sticks, knives, spears, and baskets, became highly specialized over generations. People learned to modify them according to soil type, terrain, plant species, and the size or speed of the animals they hunted. Each adjustment was based on observation and experience rather than formal design. A digging stick that worked well in soft, moist soil might break in hard, rocky ground, so different types of sticks were selected for each area. Knives were sharpened to different angles depending on whether they were cutting soft leaves, slicing roots, or processing animal hides. Spears were shaped according to the size and speed of prey. Light, slender spears were carried for birds or small mammals, while heavier, sturdier spears were reserved for medium or large game. The tips could be made of stone, bone, or hardened wood, each suited to particular tasks. Hunters learned to adjust their grip, throwing angle, and stance based on the design of the spear and the type of animal. Throwing sticks were similarly adapted, some curved slightly to travel long distances, others designed to arc downward to guide animals into traps. Each tool was tested in practice before being relied upon in a hunt. Baskets were adjusted based on the type of plant or animal being carried. Deep, narrow baskets were used for roots and tubers, wide and shallow baskets for seeds and berries. Stronger fibers were used for heavier loads, and flexible materials for fragile items. Nets were woven with different spacing to catch birds, fish, or small mammals effectively. Snares were positioned based on knowledge of animal paths, with loops tailored to size and strength. Every tool was matched carefully to the task at hand, creating a system of efficiency that allowed communities to gather and hunt with minimal wasted effort. Observation of animal behavior was central to hunting. Hunters learned the patterns of deer, goats, rabbits, birds, and fish. They noted which animals moved at dawn or dusk, which preferred shade or open fields, which traveled in herds, and which remained solitary. Tracks, droppings, chewed plants, broken branches, and disturbed soil all provided information. Hunters followed these signs quietly, adjusting speed and direction based on subtle cues. Patience was essential. Moving too quickly could startle prey, while hesitation at the wrong moment could let an opportunity pass. Water and its seasonal patterns guided daily movement. Rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds were carefully monitored. During dry seasons, hunters and gatherers focused on areas where water persisted, noting footprints of animals near remaining pools. During wet seasons, temporary streams and flooded plains offered access to aquatic plants, fish, and amphibians. Water also influenced shelter placement. Simple lean-tos or mats were positioned to avoid flooding yet remain close enough for quick access to water during daily activities. Food storage required careful planning. Roots, tubers, nuts, and seeds were collected at peak ripeness. They were cleaned, dried, and stored in woven baskets, clay containers, or shallow pits lined with leaves. Meat was preserved over slow fires, smoked or dried in the sun. Hides were treated for clothing or bedding. Fat was rendered and stored for cooking and lighting. The organization of storage spaces ensured that food was accessible and protected from pests or moisture. Storage extended the survival of communities during periods when fresh gathering or hunting was limited. Seasonal cycles dictated both gathering and hunting routines. During spring, tender shoots, early leaves, and fresh water sources guided movement. Summer brought ripening fruits, seeds, and abundant small game. Autumn emphasized nuts, roots, and preparation for colder months. Winter demanded reliance on stored food, tracking small animals, and adapting to harsh weather. Knowledge of these cycles was passed from elders to children gradually. Observation and repetition allowed young people to anticipate changes, maintain survival routines, and contribute to the work of the community. Group coordination was essential for larger hunts. Hunting medium or large game required multiple participants working together. Hunters positioned themselves along natural corridors, ridges, or riverbanks to block escape routes. Others gently guided animals toward these points using fire, noise, or movement. Communication was quiet and subtle, relying on hand signals, shifts in stance, or small gestures. Each hunter knew their role and moved deliberately to avoid startling prey or fellow participants. Success depended on patience, observation, and repeated practice over seasons. Small-scale hunting continued alongside larger coordinated efforts. Rabbits, birds, and rodents provided a steady supply of protein. Nets, snares, and throwing sticks were used frequently. Hunters learned to approach quietly, follow tracks, and identify signs of animal activity. These smaller hunts were part of daily routines, integrated with plant gathering, water collection, and tool maintenance. Each day's activities formed a steady, repeating pattern, balancing effort with reward. Children learned gradually, beginning with light tasks such as carrying small baskets, observing animal signs, or gathering easily accessible plants. They progressed to handling light tools, setting simple traps, and participating in processing collected foods. By adolescence, children were fully capable of hunting, gathering, and maintaining tools. Learning was hands-on, slow, and repeated, ensuring that skills were retained over a lifetime. Fire remained central to survival and daily routines. It provided warmth, allowed cooking, preserved food, and was used strategically during hunting. Smoke could guide animals toward traps or away from human activity. Fires were carefully managed, constructed in shallow pits surrounded by stones and maintained throughout the day. Small fires supported daily activities such as roasting roots, drying seeds, or smoking meat, while larger fires were used during group hunts or communal gatherings. Tools required constant maintenance. Knives were sharpened, baskets reinforced, nets repaired, spears rebalanced, and digging sticks smoothed. Stones used for grinding seeds were cleaned and checked for cracks. Plant fibers used in nets or bindings were replaced as needed. This maintenance was essential to ensure that each tool functioned reliably. Even a small flaw could hinder gathering or hunting, so careful, methodical attention was part of daily life. Observation of plants informed gathering practices. People learned which roots were safe to eat, which leaves were tender, and which seeds were ripe. They monitored color, texture, and location to determine when to collect. Over time, knowledge accumulated about seasonal changes, soil conditions, and patterns of plant growth. This knowledge allowed communities to plan excursions efficiently, avoid overharvesting, and maintain a balance with natural cycles. Animal tracking combined observation, intuition, and memory. Hunters noted footprints, droppings, broken vegetation, and feeding signs. They learned to estimate the size, speed, and direction of movement. They observed animals' reactions to weather, predators, and human presence. Each sign provided information that guided future movement, tool use, and hunting strategies. Knowledge of animal behavior was passed from elders to children gradually, embedded in daily practice rather than formal instruction. Communities adjusted daily routines according to weather. Rain, wind, frost, and heat influenced both plants and animals. Hunters and gatherers moved more slowly during rain to avoid disturbing trails. Frosted ground revealed animal tracks more clearly. Wind direction affected scent, sound, and visibility. Early people adapted tools and strategies to match these conditions. Digging sticks worked differently in wet or frozen soil, nets were positioned differently depending on wind, and hunting strategies were altered to match seasonal conditions. Storage of food and tools was carefully organized. Roots and tubers were separated from seeds and nuts to prevent contamination. Meat was preserved near smoke or fire to prevent spoilage. Baskets were stacked carefully, and nets stored to avoid tangling or damage. Tools were grouped by function, location, and frequency of use. This organization minimized effort during daily activities and ensured access during emergencies or seasonal scarcity. Community life depended on cooperation. Gatherers, hunters, tool makers, and children all contributed to survival. Tasks were distributed based on age, strength, and experience. Knowledge was shared through demonstration, observation, and participation. Cooperation allowed the community to move efficiently, manage resources, and adapt to changes in weather, plant growth, or animal behavior. Even the smallest details were observed. Leaves turned color to indicate ripeness or decay. Animal calls marked the presence of predators or prey. Soil moisture hinted at the best time to dig roots. Each day's movements were informed by these subtle signs, integrated into the calm, steady rhythm of survival. Over time, early people developed an intuitive understanding of the land, embedding observation, movement, and tool use into continuous, deliberate practice. Hunting larger animals required careful positioning and timing. Hunters used terrain features like narrow valleys, river bends, and dense vegetation to guide animals toward capture points. Spears, throwing sticks, nets, and snares were employed with precision. Small adjustments, such as shifting position slightly or waiting silently, often determined success. These hunts required cooperation, patience, and repetition over many days or weeks.